He opened the door. Though he wasn't supposed to, she wasn't on the list. An hour later, one patient died. By the next day, another survived. Now he sits before a committee, and no one knows what to say first. The point without a name. The security logbook was old. Faux leather, copper corners, pages worn down to a dull sheen. Each guard had their own way of writing. Some carefully printed surnames, others just noted the time. But Thomas always followed protocol. He arrived for his shift at 7:45 p.m., as usual, took the keys, signed the log, checked the monitors. The cameras were working. The door between corridors opened with a delay, just long enough for the system to warm up. Everything was as it always was. Until midnight, only 3 people entered the hospital: a doctor returning from a night call, a nurse finishing a late rotation, and an orderly whose gait he recognized. Thomas logged them all. Black ink, clear handwriting. Then she came at around 1 a.m. A woman in a gray hood, no bag. She walked up quietly, spoke evenly, said she needed just a minute, not loudly but firmly. She didn't beg, didn't plead, just looked at him directly, and he asked, "Who are you here for?" She answered, "Room 206, just a glance." He opened the log, flipped through. It showed no such entry, no pending visits. The names of doctors didn't match. He was about to say no, but then she added, "He asked me, if ever." Something shifted in him. Her gaze was almost the same as that woman from the 3rd floor. The one who, last year, had begged to see her husband. He hadn't let her in, and he'd regretted it for months after. No one said he'd done anything wrong, but after that night, he saw authorized and unauthorized a little differently. He looked at the woman again and knew he couldn't turn her away. 30 seconds later, Thomas stood, walked her to the door, unlocked it, didn't write her down. He didn't know why, just did. There was something about her. An hour later, a patient in another room died of a medication overdose, prescribed in error. The next morning, they found a note in room 206 with the correct dosage, signed by a physician who had died a year ago. The morning was tense. Normally, by now, he'd hand over his shift, place the log on the edge of the desk, give a brief report, and walk home. But today, he stayed. They asked Thomas to remain for clarification. The tone was cold, but not aggressive. Yet, 2 men stood in the intake room, one in a gray suit holding a folder with stiff motions, the other wearing glasses, no tie, with a tablet. The first introduced himself as Mason from Legal Security. The second, Phelps, Internal Audit. Both had printouts of log entries and building access data. Neither looked him in the eyes. Mason slid a sheet into his folder and said without looking up, "From midnight to 2, no entries." Thomas nodded. "No one came in," he replied. Phelps looked up. His tone wasn't threatening, but persistent. "You're sure?" Thomas nodded again. His posture was straight, but inside he was shaking. He knew what this was about. The woman, the one who hadn't begged, just stood there, as if she knew he wouldn't ask too much. Mason spoke again. "The camera. Why is there no archive for 112? Thomas looked at the laptop screen where the loading icon kept spinning. He'd checked the feed himself during the night. It was working fine. But now, black frame, red error. He shrugged, not lying but not defending himself either. "Glitches happen," Mason said flatly, "especially in the older wings." Phelps peered closer. "Sometimes they happen a little too precisely. Tell me, did you notice anything odd?" A doctor peeked in, a woman, pale, tired eyes. She looked at Thomas, then at them. "Sorry, may I?" she asked. "It's urgent." Mason nodded. Phelps lingered on Thomas a bit longer before following. Thomas was alone. Beside him, the logbook. He flipped to the right page, everything in order, just one empty stretch of time. Beside it, a faint indentation, as if someone had made a dot, then erased it. He traced it with his finger. Since that night, one thought wouldn't leave him. What if he hadn't let her in? What if he just said not allowed? They returned 15 minutes later. Mason had a printout of camera diagnostics. Phelps whispered into his phone, ending the call just as he leaned over to glance at Mason's sheet. The camera was indeed offline, Mason said. 4 minutes. Logged as a system error, but the source is unclear. Phelps added, could be tampering, though nothing explicit. Thomas said nothing. He was staring at the monitor, which still showed the same image. A stairwell, dimly lit, empty. That's where she should have been. Phelps leaned slightly forward. You're certain no one came through? Not even close? Maybe someone approached but didn't enter. No, said Thomas. It wasn't a lie. He really hadn't seen her. The woman had vanished the moment she entered. He hadn't heard her footsteps, hadn't seen the door swing back. Just a faint scent, like rubbing alcohol mixed with something herbal. Maybe sage, he wondered. Did it even happen? Or did he imagine her? Mason continued, holding up the printout. A patient died. The wrong medication. Mix-up in departments. The doctor says he gave instructions to the nurse, but the record shows a different room number. And you think this connects to my post? Thomas asked. They didn't answer. Phelps looked back at the log. We need to investigate. For now, temporary suspension. No penalties. But if anything comes to mind, it's better to speak now. Thomas stood, left the log on the table. On his way out, he heard Mason say, he didn't even flinch. Or maybe he knows who he let in, Phelps murmured. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He remembered her face. Plain, quiet, unremarkable. But something about it wouldn't leave him. He stood, pulled an old pen from his bag, and on a scrap of paper wrote, 206, do not adjust dosage, recheck, signature, K.P. McLean. It was the exact note they'd found that morning. He had never seen that name before, but now he remembered it perfectly. The next morning, he went to the archive. Not for work, he was formally suspended, but he couldn't just walk past the building. His feet veered toward the familiar path on their own. He paused in the lobby. By the window stood a young man, thin, wearing a warm jacket, with an IV taped into the crook of his arm. He was looking outside. Next to him, his mother. In her hands was a folded piece of paper. Old paper. Thomas immediately recognized the edge. He knew it was the note. The woman looked at him for a long time, not afraid, not accusing. In her gaze was understanding and quiet gratitude. Thank you to whoever was there, she said softly. He didn't reply, just nodded, then turned away. Suddenly, he felt uneasy. He knew he'd done the right thing, but for the first time he wondered, what if he had closed the door? He walked past the security desk. A different shift was on duty, a young guy with an earbud in one ear and a coffee cup in hand. He didn't recognize Thomas, didn't ask who he was, just nodded and turned back to the screen. Thomas climbed to the second floor. On the wall, an in memoriam plaque, staff who had passed away, nameplates, photos, flowers. He ran his finger along the bottom row. There, K.P. McLean, paramedic, died a year ago, heart attack. The photo was old, black and white, a woman with glasses and short hair. Not the same person who came that night, but the signature was identical. He compared the features, useless. They were different people. He descended to the basement, into the document archive, asked for the visitor log from last fall, claimed he was looking for a colleague. The clerk searched and pulled a thick binder. He flipped through it for a long time. Searched for K.P. McLean. Nothing. Not a single entry under that name. Not even on the day she worked. Only signatures on medical records. But in the security log, nothing. He went to HR, said he was verifying information, asked for a copy of her personnel file. They said confidential. Asked, why do you need it? He didn't answer. On his way out, he overheard one of the women in the office whisper, McLean. No one ever logged her. She always came through the back entrance. Why? Because it was easier that way. Everyone knew. Just No one thought it needed documenting. Outside, it was raining. Thomas stood by the glass door. Behind him, the empty security desk. Inside, a lamp, the old logbook, new cameras. He understood. The woman wasn't McLean, but with her name came the memory of someone long erased. The next day, a doctor called him, the same one who had peeked into the committee room, a woman with a weary voice. She spoke plainly. "I didn't report you." Pause. "But you should know, there really was a mistake in room 206. The prescription was wrong. If not for the note, I don't know how it would have ended." Thomas was sitting at his kitchen table. In front of him, a cold kettle, a torn corner of the note, and a pen without a cap. "Who wrote it?" he asked. "That's the thing. No one in the ward admits to it. They check the handwriting, none match. But you know what's strange?" She paused again. "On the paper, aside from the text, there's a microscopic imprint. On the fold. Old, barely visible. The name McLean. Like a watermark, you see?" He didn't answer, just listen. "And one more thing. We looked into the patient's history," she continued. "A month ago, he complained of pain. Did tests, but in the chart, it's blank. Like it was all erased. But now we found a duplicate. Someone kept copies of the old prescriptions from a paramedic, dated a year ago." "K.P. McLean?" he asked. "Exactly." She fell silent again. "You know, sometimes I think this place is run not just by what's written down, but by what someone refused to let disappear." Thomas turned off his phone, sat in silence for a long while, then went to the closet. Among old boxes, he found his old notebook, spiral-bound from his days in the ER. He flipped through it, and suddenly he found it. Entry from March 9th of last year. Entry K.P. McLean, night rounds, said, "The one in 206, off numbers, test is off. Ask me not to tell anyone." Didn't sign. I logged it myself, just in case. He had forgotten about it then, just jotted it down and moved on. Now he remembered. They came to him again, no warning this time. Not to the office, not by phone, straight to his door. The same two men. Mason, with a tablet tucked into his elbow. Phelps, with a folder and a tired look. Polite, courteous, without pressure, but with a shadow of insistence in their tone. "We've been informed you kept a notebook," Mason began. "We'd like to see it." "These are my personal notes," Thomas replied. "Maybe so," Phelps interjected, "but if there's patient data, it falls under internal review. We're not accusing, just verifying." He didn't hand it over right away. First he wondered, should he? There was nothing dramatic inside, just fragments, dates, times, words he'd written so he wouldn't forget what he'd seen. They'd never seemed important, until someone died and someone else lived. He handed it over. Mason flipped quickly, diagonally. Phelps read carefully, pausing often. At one point he placed a finger on a page. "March 9th, he said. "You weren't on ER duty then?" "I was. End of my last long shift." "Why didn't you mention this before?" Phelps asked, eyes still on the page. Thomas shrugged. "Because no one asked." Pause. "And because I didn't know it might save someone's life." Phelps looked at him intently, then gently closed the notebook. Something in his eyes had shifted, as if he understood more than he could say. Mason, meanwhile, was already turning toward the door. "We won't be taking the notebook, but maybe someone from medical will want to digitize it. It might help." After they left, Thomas stood by the window. Outside it rained. Droplets slid down the glass, blurring his reflection. His face was barely visible, just a shadow in the light from the hallway. He sat back at the table, pulled out the old visitor log he had taken by accident a year ago and never returned. Flipped through it, the last page, blank. He picked up his pen and wrote, "Sometimes the one who wasn't recorded was the only one who knew what to do." He placed a period. No signature. 2 months later, he was summoned again, but not to HR and not for questioning. It came as an ordinary letter, with the hospital's return address and a short note. Security Department recertification. Personal contribution to archival restoration. He almost didn't go. But he did. In the room, just a few people, informal, no protocols. One of the administrators shook his hand. Another thanked him for timely preservation of records. No one spoke directly. Everything was courteous, dry, but with an undertone. Something had changed. In the lobby, he noticed a new plaque. Transparent, frameless. It held just one line. Starting 1st of August, all entries recorded, including those who help in silence. He stood near the security desk. The young guard, the one with coffee, turned around. "Thomas, weren't you reassigned here?" "No," he said, "just passing through." But then he lingered by the desk. On top, a new logbook, modern with a QR code printed on each page. Thomas flipped through the first one. The responsible field did not bear his name. He placed his old pen on the cover's edge, the same pen he once used to write about room 206, and walked toward the exit. Right by the door stood a bench. On it, a woman sat, not the one who had come that night, not the one in the photo, just a woman. She looked ahead, holding a thin folder in her lap. As he passed, she quietly said, "Thank you for not closing the door that time." He stopped, wanted to reply, but she had already stood up and walked inside. And at the desk, the guard wrote in the log, 843, woman in gray, no name, admitted, and added in his own hand, confirmed.